21 Israelites to be overrun in the end times. Revelation 20 describes the end times where the Israelites are being overrun by all other peoples in the world. First, it explains that Satan, or the adversary, is being bound in a pit and Christ reigns for 1,000 years. This is the 1,000 years of Christianity in Europe, where the race of Cain was excluded from society. However, by the time of the French Revolution, Napoleon emancipated the race of Cain, making them equal citizens to Christians, and Revelation explains the result. And when the 1,000 years are completed, the adversary shall be released from his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them to battle, of which the number of them is as the sands of the sea. And then next, and they had gone up upon the breadth of the earth, and encircled the encampment of the saints, and the beloved city, and fire descended from out of heaven, and devoured them. This is the race of Cain going out to all nations to gather them against us. Magog is this great economic international system that has enslaved us, whilst Gog was a son of Japheth, whose territory was above the Caucasus Mountains. Once the Byzantine Empire excluded the race of Cain, they fled to Khazaria, which was the former territory of Gog. Here they formulated a plan to overrun and destroy Christendom, first with the Arab invasions, then the Turks, and now we have been duped into willingly being flooded. The camp of the saints are the Israelite nations. Is not every single European nation being flooded? No other peoples are undergoing this process, and therefore only we fulfill this prophecy, and must be the Israelites. 22. The Israelite conquests and migrations to Greece. The earliest Greek writers described the Hellenes or Greeks as four distinct tribes: the Ionians, Aeolians, Danans, and Dorians. The Ionians were Javan from Japheth, whilst the other three tribes were Israelites. The Aeolians were likely Israelite Phoenicians. The Danans were the tribe of Dan, who left the Exodus by sea rather than going with Moses. And the Dorians invaded Greece, originating from the seaport Dor in Manasseh's territory. The historian Diodorus Siculus states, the aliens, Israelites, were driven from the country, that's Egypt, and the most outstanding and active amongst them banded together, and as some say, were cast ashore in Greece and certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danaus and Cadmus. But the greater number were driven into what is now called Judea. The colony was headed by a man called Moses, outstanding both for his wisdom and for his courage. So not all Israelites went with Moses. Danaus is likely referring to Dan, the patriarch of the tribe of Dan, whilst Cadmus appears in other Greek histories such as Tacitus. Tradition indeed says that Cadmus, visiting Greece in a Phoenician fleet, was the teacher of this art to its yet barbarous tribes. The Israelite Phoenicians colonized the Mediterranean and spread the alphabet. So the Greeks believed the Danans, Phoenicians, and Israelites who conquered Canaan were interrelated. The historian Flavius Josephus records a letter from the king of Sparta to the high priest at Jerusalem, stating, "We have discovered that both the Judeans and the Lacedaemonians are of the same family and are derived from the kindred of Abraham." This is also recorded in the book of Maccabees. The Spartans were Dorian Greeks, meaning they were Israelites. So many of the Greeks were Israelites. 23. The Israelite Trojans and Romans. The Trojans originated from Zara, Judah. Judah's descendants would be kings and rulers of the Israelites forever. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. But Judah had twin sons, Perez and Zerah, and from the bloodline of Perez came King David and King Solomon, and other kings in the land of Canaan. But that took centuries. Zerah's sons are listed. The sons of Zerah, Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dada, 5 in all. But once these sons are named, they disappear from the Bible. And around the time of the Exodus, in Egypt, Zerah is mentioned, and he is with his twin brother Perez, but only the sons of Perez are present. Meanwhile, in Greek history of the same period, a king Dardanus, which is the Greek version of Dada, arose in the Troad, where he founded a colony named Dardania. His people were the Dardanians, and from his descendants came Troy and the Trojans. After the sacking of Troy by the Danan Greeks, a remnant of Trojans fled Greece. They were led by Aeneas, a prince of Troy and cousin of the famous Hector of Troy. Aeneas and his men sailed around the Mediterranean and finally settled in Latium, Italy. Aeneas married the daughter of the king of Latium, and centuries later a descendant of Aeneas named Romulus founded the city of Rome. This is all confirmed by Strabo. The wandering of Aeneas are a traditional fact. Many of the kings in Greece descended from the Trojans. Then Rome came to conquer the known world, and then the kings of the Germanic tribes came to rule, who descended from David. So Judah has always ruled over the Israelites, one way or another. Only Europeans fulfill this prophecy. 24. The Phoenician colonization of Europe. The Phoenicians were Israelites who colonized the Mediterranean coastlands. Modern academia and historians lie, trying to claim they were Canaanites to obscure the true origin of Europeans from Israelites. They claim a separate Phoenician kingdom existed from the kingdom of Israel. But where is that in the Bible? It's all a lie. The Phoenicians primarily came from Tyre and Sidon. Both these cities were within the territories of the northern tribes. And the reason they were called Phoenicians is because they used a purple dye found in the mollusk on the shores of Israel. They used it on their clothing, their ship sails, and sold the dye as a luxury. In Greek, the word phoinos means purple, so Phoenicians means purple people, and this was the name the Greeks gave to these maritime northern tribes. As the Israelites were deported by the Assyrians, only the Greek histories survive, and most of the history comes from the Ionians, who were Javan in Athens. Therefore, they would not have properly understood the history of Israel, and just called them Phoenicians. Carthage became the most prosperous Phoenician colony. The famous General Hannibal can clearly be seen to be white, as was the founder Dodo, said to be blonde and white. The Phoenicians also reached as far as Iberia, Gaul, and even the British Isles. Many Europeans are descended from the Phoenicians, and therefore the Israelites must have looked like Europeans. 25. Paganism identifies who the lost sheep are. The Germanic paganism reveals that they are the Israelites of the Bible. After being deported by the Assyrians and migrating to Europe, they gradually fell away from Yahweh. In the Germanic Eddas, we have Odin and his son Thor fighting the Midgard serpent that is circling the earth. And in the end times, called Ragnarok, there will be a final battle. And in the Bible, Yahweh's adversary is the fallen angels and their descendants, particularly the race of Cain, which collectively are described as a serpent. In Revelation, the serpent is trying to flood the woman, who is the Israelites, meaning wipe us out in invasions, which is happening to all of our nations. Furthermore, in the Bible, Yahweh has promised to destroy the serpent once and for all to save his people who are being overrun. And this is Christ's second coming, i.e. Ragnarok, which is also described in Christ's parables as the dividing of the sheep and the goats. Additionally, Loki is said to have birthed this serpent, and in Latin the K was always hard, so Lucifer would be Lucifer. So Loki or Lucky is short for Lucifer. The fallen angel in the garden is also responsible for Cain when he seduced Eve. And finally, the Eddas describe the Germanic tribes originating from the east, just as the Greek, Roman, and ancient histories describe, which correlates with the Bible, which states that the deported tribes went east to the cities of the Medes, from where sprung the Sake, Scythians, Cimmerians, all who migrated to Europe. 26. Most traditional English names are from biblical figures. Most European Christian names are drawn from the Bible. Biblical names such as Peter, Andrew, James, and John, all apostles of Christ. Were the apostles called Tyrone, Abu, or Wong? Other male biblical names include Simon, Philip, Thomas, Matthew, Mark, Paul, Luke, Stephen, Timothy, and from the Old Testament, Adam, Aaron, Benjamin, Daniel, Jacob, and Jonathan, and many more. Female names include Mary, Elizabeth, Anna, Chloe, Hannah, Lydia, Naomi, Rebecca, Rachel, Sarah, Suzanne, and more. And whilst not immediately obvious, many shorter names are derived from longer biblical names. Eli is short for Elijah, Jack for Jacob, Jerry for Jeremiah, Joe for Joseph, Toby for Tobiah, Zach for Zechariah, and so on. All these names are intrinsic to European culture and heritage. Most would be unknown in Europe had it not been for our preservation of scripture. Non-Europeans would never even heard of these biblical names had we not forcefully Christianized them. Furthermore, many of the names in the New Testament were actually Greek and Roman. Stephen, the first martyr, was a Greek name, and Luke or Lucas, the gospel writer, was a Roman name. This shows the intrinsic relationship and common culture shared by the Israelites in Judea and the Greek and Romans who were Israelites themselves. It also shows that the Europeans are the people of the Bible, and that the gospel was spread only to Europeans. It's in our very names. 27. Peter called the Europeans an elect race and a royal priesthood. Peter wrote his first epistle to Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. These Asia Minor locations were populated by white Romans, Greeks, and Galatians, who were the Germanic tribes. Peter referred to them collectively as a chosen generation, which should be race, a royal priesthood, a holy or separate nation, a peculiar people. Peter is quoting Yahweh's words to the Israelites through Moses. Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. So the fact that Peter used these same words shows that he believed the Greeks, Romans, and Galatians were Israelites. Peter goes on that you should show forth the praises of him who have called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained obtain mercy. Here Peter is referring to Hosea. The Israelites had been divorced, cast off, and no longer had a shepherd, and so were in darkness. Yahweh had withdrawn his mercy during the Assyrian deportations, but now in Christ the Israelites were being shown mercy again, and Peter identifies the Europeans as these people. 28. True Israelites divorced and dispersed could never resettle Palestine. In Hosea, Yahweh declared he is divorcing Israel. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, neither am I her husband. Let her therefore put away her whoredoms out of her sight and her adulteries from between her breasts. Here ancient Israel was the mother, and the Israelites going into deportation were her children. Yahweh then chastised Israel for their international trade and condemned them for intermixing with the Canaanites. And I will not have mercy upon her children, for they be the children of whoredoms. In this way Yahweh showed he only cared for his own people and not for bastards. Yahweh proclaimed the punishment. Therefore behold, I will hedge up thy way with thorns and make a wall, that she shall not find her paths. When the Israelites conquered Canaan, Yahweh had warned them, but if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come to pass that those which you let remain of them shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides. So those Canaanites who were pricks and thorns would now become a hedge of thorns. Later in the gospel, Christ used them as an example. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? The East gradually becoming thorns was a gradual process. The Arab conquest especially changed the demographics forever, and the European Crusades tried to win them back, but were always doomed to fail. Ultimately Europe was never unified, and they could not overcome the pricks and thorns. Any people living there today claiming to be the people of the Bible must be the thorns Yahweh warned us of. Yahweh had other plans and glories planned for the Israelites in Europe and beyond. 29. European nations, cities and settlements still with Hebrew names. Our Israelite ancestors left traces of the Hebrew language in place names all across Europe. Denmark, for example, means the territory of Dan. The rivers Danube, Don and Dnieper still bear the name of the tribe of Dan. The Crimea in Ukraine gets its name from the Cimmerians, who passed through those lands on their way to Europe, and the Welsh still call themselves the Cymry after the Cimmerians, a branch of whom crossed over the North Sea into Britain. In more ancient times, Spain was called Iberia and Ireland Hibernia. Both names were derived from the Hebrew word Eba, which means other side. From the coast of Israel, Spain was the other side of the Mediterranean, and so was Ireland if you sailed north from Spain. These names were bequeathed by the Israelite maritime Phoenicians with their perspective of the other side as they colonized Europe from the time of the Judges. It was only natural that they named places in their Hebrew tongue. Carthage means new city in Hebrew. Its original name was Kiryat Hadesh, and it was an offshoot of the city Tyre, an Israelite port. The Romans corrupted the name to Carthage, and the prefix Kar is the word for a city. In Britain, the Phoenician settlements also had Hebrew names with that prefix, such as Cardiff, Caral. At one time, many places in Britain began with Kar. The lasting message of these place names is that Europe was settled by ancient Israelites, as we remain the true Israelites today. 30. The Scottish Declaration of Arbroath. The Scottish Declaration of Arbroath is the most famous document in Scottish history. It declares the Scots to be the descendants of the children of Israel. It was written in 1320 AD. A diplomatic letter was addressed to the Pope begging for help and protection against the English kings. One portion reads, "Most Holy Father and Lord," that's the Pope, "we know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients, we find that among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, have been graced with widespread renown. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by the way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillar of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course in the time of Spain, among the most savage tribes, but nowhere could they be subdued by any race, however barbarous. Hence they came 1200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea, to their home in the west, where they still live today. The Britons they drove out, the Picts they utterly destroyed, and even though they were often assailed by the Norwegians, the Danes and the English, they took possession of that home with many victories and untold efforts, and as the histories of old time bear witness, they have held it free for all bondage ever since. Not only did the Scots identify themselves with the Scythians, but they reckoned their timeline according to the Exodus. Only Israelites would use that timeline. Greater Scythia was above the Caucasus Mountains to the west. It was certainly possible to sail from there, throughout the Mediterranean, around Spain, and then to Scotland. The timeline is slightly off, but Scots in the 14th century lacked access to the vast information we have today. So by their timeline we would date their arrival in Scotland to be between the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, which is fair enough. 31. Israelites to be the chief among all the nations. Yahweh promised Abraham his descendants would inherit the world, and in Deuteronomy we see how this would unfold. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of Yahweh thy God, to observe and do all his commandments which I command thee this day, that Yahweh thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come unto thee, and overtake thee. Later it is explained, if they disobeyed, they would be overrun. Therefore the Israelites were destined to be the chief among the nations, and by David and Solomon's time the Israelites had been raised above all nations. But this did not last. They turned away from Yahweh and his law, and God had the Assyrians and Babylonians deport them, and their lands were overrun. But once the Israelites in Europe had been reconciled to Yahweh through Christianity, as Christ said, "If you love me, keep my commandments," and as a result we were once again elevated above all nations. This was predominantly in the form of the German Holy Roman Empire, then the British Empire, and currently the American Empire, all of which through we have ruled the world. Although there have always been the nefarious descendants of Cain, the bankers, supporting these empires behind the scenes for their own gain, nevertheless the Europeans have enjoyed the status of world hegemony. But we are now in the time of Jacob's trouble, where we are fighting for our very survival. The treacherous descendants of Cain, or Esau, have subverted all of our nations with their international banking system, and we are once again being overrun. Only Europeans fit these prophecies. 32. The Assyrian tablets and other inscriptions. With the expansion of the British Empire in the 19th century, British and European archaeologists could explore the Near East. They found thousands of Mesopotamian inscriptions, and these show that the Assyrians called the Israelites the Bit Comri, which means the house of Kimri. Bit means house, and Kimri is referring to King Omri, who ruled over the northern kingdom of Israel at the time. One inscription reads, "I besieged and conquered Samaria, led away as booty 27,290 inhabitants." This shows the Assyrians deported the northern tribes. Then another inscription reads, "As to Hezekiah the Judahite, he did not submit to my yoke. I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities. And later, I drove out 200,150 people, young and old, male and female." This shows that all of Judah was deported except for Jerusalem. So the lost tribes are really all 12 tribes, not just 10 as some believe. And when this information is cross-referenced with ancient classics, it is clear that the Chimerian Israelites were connected to the Scythians, Sake, Celts, Gauls, and the Germanic tribes. But this took decades to piece together, and even now most of our people are not aware of it. This is largely due to the race of Cain lurking in the background, trying to suppress and discredit these discoveries. The first significant group to use this information was in Britain, who believed that only the British Empire were the Israelites. This is ridiculous, as the British come from the Germanic tribes and other tribes. After World War I, with the decline of the British Empire, other groups in America took this information and advanced it, realizing that all Europeans are the Israelites, and importantly that those claiming to be the people of the Bible are lying. 33. The books of Flavius Josephus. The ancient historian Flavius Josephus was a Judean and a Pharisee. He also served as a general with the Judean armies in their fight against Rome. He was born after Christ and was alive to experience the destruction of Jerusalem. His books fill in the gap between the Maccabees and the coming of Christ, roughly 200 BC to 0 BC. He explains that the returning Israelites from the Babylonian deportations gradually grew stronger under the Persian Empire and then Seleucid Empire. Eventually they were strong enough to become independent. Initially they drove out all the surrounding foreign nations, particularly the Edomites, but by around 150 BC the policy changed under their high priest Hyrcanus. As we read, Hyrcanus took also Dorsa and Marissa, cities of Idumea or Edom, and subdued all the Idumeans or Edomites, and permitted them to stay in that country if they would circumcise their genitals and make use of the laws of the Judeans. And they were so desirous of living in the country of their forefathers that they submitted to the use of circumcision and the rest of the Judean ways of living. At which time therefore this befell them, that they were hereafter no other than Judeans. Esau had taken Canaanite wives, and the Canaanites had mixed with the race of Cain and Nephilim, so therefore mixing with Edomites was totally against the law, and from then on there were both real Israelites and Edomites both living together, labelled as Judeans. By the time of Christ the Edomites had usurped power in Judea under King Herod, and most Sadducees and many Pharisees were Edomites. This is why they rejected Christ and the cause of all the commotion during his ministry. Therefore we understand ultimately why they had him crucified, because they were the race of Cain, and who they are and who we are. 34. Greek and Roman historians showed the Israelites were white. In the past, our schools taught the Greek and Roman classics, where we actually learned real history, not propaganda. Homer describes the Trojan War, and many of the characters are described as white, with blonde and red hair, such as Penelope, who is described as white and ivory. And even the pagan gods are described this way, such as white-armed Juno. To him, there were no Dorians in Greek yet, but they were on the island of Crete, and other historians explain that 3 generations after the Trojan War, the Dorians invaded, and it's easy to say how Crete was used as the base of operations for the invasion. And before Crete, the Dorians came from the seaport Dor in the land of Israel in the territory of Manasseh. Herodotus described the Cimmerians, Saccans or Sake, and Scythians as being the same people, and that they all originated from the Middle East. Strabo described the Israelites and Edomites living together in Judea by around the time of Christ, which collaborates Flavius Josephus. Diodorus Siculus described the Ethiopians, Africans, Amazons, and Europeans all sharing a similar culture and physically looking the same. However, on the fringes of the Nile River and Arabia were other people. This shows that the Arab conquest centuries later must have drastically changed the demographics of northern Africa and the East. Polybus shows us how Egypt had greatly declined and large parts of the population had become mixed, showing the Nubian invasion centuries prior must have changed the demographics forever. So on the fringes of the Greco-Roman world there was great decline. Today this has come to all of our nations. 35. Jeremiah's reunion of Israel and Judah under a new covenant. In the Old Testament, there are many promises and prophecies over and over again where Yahweh spoke of his intention to regather the dispersed Israelites. In Jeremiah, behold, the days come, saith Yahweh, thou wilt make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break. Although I was a husband unto them, saith Yahweh, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith Yahweh, I will put my law in their inwards parts, and I will write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. This new covenant is Christianity, and as we can see, it is exclusively only for Israel and Judah, to reunite them to Yahweh, who is Christ. Paul of Tarsus cited this passage from Jeremiah in his epistle to the Hebrews. So we see Paul understood his entire ministry was the new covenant to reunite Israel and Judah. And in Romans chapter 9, he wrote, those who are Israelites, who is the position of sons, and the honor, and the covenants, and the legalization, and the service, and the promises. It was all for the Europeans who are the Israelites, whom he called his kinsmen according to the flesh. So physical Israelites, not spiritual. And Paul explained in Acts his purpose, and now for the hope of the promise having been made by God to our fathers, I stand being judged, for which our 12 tribes serving in earnest night and day hope to attain, concerning which hope I am charged by the Judeans king. So his whole purpose, again, was for the 12 tribes. The new covenant proves the Europeans are the Israelites. 36. Ezekiel's remerging of Israel and Judah as 2 sticks into one. Ezekiel made a remarkable prophecy that Yahweh would do the impossible. He would join 2 broken sticks into 1 whole stick. These are allegories for the divided kingdom, Israel and Judah. This would include all the dispersed Israelites who migrated to Europe as Phoenicians, Danans, Dorians, Trojans, and also those who were deported in the Assyrians and Babylonian deportations much later. Ezekiel gives a description of Yahweh's lost sheep who had wandered over the mountains, and this is them migrating away. He then describes the descendants of Esau moving into the former lands of Israel and Judah. This is a slow 500-year process of them eventually stealing our identity and claiming to be the people of the Bible. Later, Ezekiel describes a valley of bones coming alive. Allegorically, the lost tribes were walking corpses unless Christ came to save them. And Ezekiel describes the Israelites becoming one nation again, with one king over them. As we read, moreover, thou son of man, take thee 1 stick and write upon it for Judah and for the children of Israel his companions. Then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel his companions, and join them to one another into 1 stick, and they shall become one in thine hand. The Israelites became one again in Europe as Christendom, with Christ their king over them. Only we fulfill Ezekiel's prophecy. 37. Isaiah proves the Europeans are the Israelites. A careful reading of Isaiah shows us that the children of Israel were destined to end up in Europe. Isaiah chapter 10 foretells the destruction of Assyria, and that the Israelites would play a large part in that. It was the Cimmerians in league with Babylonians, Persians and Medes that destroyed Assyria. The Cimmerians must therefore be the Israelites. Isaiah chapter 11 foretells the regathering of all Israel together under the root of Jesse, in other words Christ. Christianity would reunite his people, and this can only be Christian Europe. Chapter 14 foretells the Israelites becoming the dominant power. Under Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the dispersed Israelites had been under those empires, but after, the Scythians took many of these former nations as slaves and brought them to Europe. And Diodorus Siculus explains the Scythians had taken people of the Medes and Assyrians and forcibly replanted them in Europe. Isaiah chapter 41 speaks to the Israelites on the coastland, in other words, the Mediterranean, and around the Black and Caspian Sea. It describes the coming of Christ, but he is the righteous man in the east. So the Israelites must have been in the west, in Europe. And earlier in Isaiah 11, it describes the Israelites fleeing in ships to the west, which must be Europe. And finally, Isaiah 61 describes the Israelites heading to Tarshish, which is Spain, Lud, the Lydians, which is Anatolia, Tubal, which was above the Caucasus Mountains, and Javan, which is Greece. So the Israelites would be revived under Christianity and end up in Europe, which is the exact path the Cimmerians, Scythians, and Germanic tribes took to reach Europe. 38. Daniel's messianic prophecy and the destruction of Jerusalem. Daniel explains Christ's purpose to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Sin is transgression of the law. Only the Israelites were given the law. So Christ came to forgive the Israelites and nobody else. Nobody else needed forgiveness. To make reconciliation for iniquity. Only the Israelites were divorced and dispersed in the deportation for that iniquity. How can any other people be reconciled to God if they never had a relationship in the first place? Amos tells us, only you, that's the Israelites, have I known of all the families of the earth. And Christ stated upon the day of resurrection, he will tell some of the so-called believers, and then I will profess unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. In the prophets, Yahweh promised to cleanse the Israelites from all their iniquity. Nobody else had that promise. To anoint the most holy. Holy means to be separate and to be dedicated to God. The Israelites were separated on Mount Sinai when they accepted the law, to be a separate, distinct nation apart from all other nations. And Daniel also reveals the destruction of Jerusalem, and the people of the prince that shall come destroy the city, that's Jerusalem, meaning the people of Christ would destroy Jerusalem. The Romans sacked Jerusalem, yet they were pagans and not Christians, but they descended from the Israelites. So Christ only knows his people, who are the Europeans. 39. Minor prophets show Yahweh only deals with Israel. Most Christians, unfortunately, only focus on the New Testament and are deceived into thinking we are Gentiles, which is a mistranslation. But much of what is happening to our nations today, the immorality, the degeneracy, and us being overrun, was happening back in the time of the prophets. In Jonah, he tried to sail to Tarshish, which is Spain. This shows how easily the Israelites could sail to Europe. The great Phoenician colonization of Europe should be no surprise. In Hosea, we learn Yahweh sees Israel as his wife, that the deportations were a divorce, but he would one day remarry the same people, and this is the Supper of the Lamb in Revelation, where Christ saves his people from being overrun. Amos confirms the deported Israelites went north as they went beyond Damascus, which was above the kingdom of Israel. Micah shows that the Israelites were going into captivity and would be brought low, but eventually would rise again and enslave their captors. This is the Assyrians, Babylonians, Medes, Persians, and take many of them with them, which they did in the Scythian migrations to Europe. Joel described the ancient kingdom being overrun by locusts, cankerworms, palmerworms, and caterpillars. He is talking allegorically about people. The same thing is happening to our nations today. Zechariah states the Philistines would be replaced by bastards, or some translations have it, people of mixed origin. Other prophets explain this would gradually happen to the entire Middle East. Malachi tells us that in the end times there would be a great awakening. The children of Israel would finally remember their real identity, meaning the Europeans will realize who we are. 40. Revelation is Eurocentric and only about the 12 tribes. If the Old Testament focuses on the Israelites, why would Christ's revelation switch to a different people? The 7 churches were within Anatolia, which were all white Greek and Roman colonies. The woman in Revelation is the Israelites who were divorced and deported. They no longer are the wife of Yahweh. All the references of the woman with 12 stars fleeing into a wilderness is the 12 tribes of Israelites migrating to Europe. The woman being chased by the dragon is the race of Cain following us and infiltrating our nations. The 4 horsemen is the stages of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. The great persecution of Christians, again, only happened in Europe. The 12 tribes being sealed demonstrates they survived Rome collapsing and again are in Europe. The bottomless pit being opened to wipe out a third of life is the rise of Islam and a third of Europe being taken. The opening of the little book is the mass printing of the Bible, again happening only in Europe. The 2 witnesses being revealed is the European Protestant Reformation, where Israel and Judah witness for Christ and stood up against the tyranny of the Catholic Church. The seventh beast, which recovers its head wound and comes from the fourth beast, is the Roman Catholic Church, coming from the forgone Roman Empire. The 1,000-year reign is the 1,000 years of Christianity we got in Europe. The eighth beast and Satan being released is the race of Cain being emancipated after the French Revolution and going out to all nations to overrun us. All this and more shows we are the Israelites.